They say respect is earned. But what if it disappears the second you show up in a hoodie? One man walked into Prestige Motors like any customer until the manager learned who actually signed his paycheck. This story isn't about chrome and horsepower. It's about status, snap judgments, and the kind of quiet revenge that speaks louder than any engine. But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Daryl Carter pulled into the sun-scorched lot of Prestige Motors behind the wheel of an unbranded SUV so plain it looked like it came with a coupon. The Arizona heat shimmered off the blacktop as if the pavement itself was holding its breath. Rows of six-figure cars lined the entrance like trophies in a museum that forgot people still bleed. Daryl parked in the back, no reserved signs, no valet handshake, just silence and sunlight. He stepped out slowly, adjusting his hoodie, the kind of soft gray cotton that looked like it had been washed too many times. The decision was intentional. He wasn't here as the owner, he was here as the overlooked. Halfway to the entrance, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Board signed the culture audit plan. Go get 'em. He didn't smile. He nodded to himself and pulled the glass door open. The moment he entered, the air conditioning slapped him with cold indifference. The scent of polished leather and fresh wax was thick, trying a little too hard to say, "You can't afford this." Bright lights reflected off the hoods of shiny coupes and muscular SUVs, each vehicle presented like a holy artifact. Behind a reception desk stood 3 sales staff chatting, their laughter hushed just slightly when they noticed him. Daryl walked in like he had a reason, which he did, but he watched their posture shift, eyes scan. It was subtle, just enough to let him know the room saw a hoodie, not a human. A man in khakis with a Bluetooth in his ear glanced at Daryl, then leaned toward his coworker. Daryl caught the words, "Lost delivery guy?" before they fell into a forced cough. That was the first test, and they'd already flunked. Susan appeared like stage lighting, bright, sharp, and a little too aware of her own spotlight. She walked over with a clipboard held like a badge and a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Mid-40s, well-tailored navy blazer, and the kind of walk that said, "My time is more expensive than your down payment." "Good afternoon," she said crisply, her voice designed for showroom acoustics. "Can I help you with something?" Daryl nodded, calm. "Just browsing." Her eyes did a full scan, from his shoes to the half-zipped hoodie, and landed on the word just like it had offended her. "Are you looking for something in particular?" she asked, the smile still there but tight now, as if customer service was a contract she regretted signing. "A few things caught my eye," he said easily, glancing toward the silver coupe displayed dead center. Susan's eyebrows arched in polite disbelief. She took a breath, the kind that meant she was about to say something she thought sounded helpful but would land like a slap. "Just so you know," she began, "most of our vehicles start at 6 figures. We typically work with pre-qualified buyers. Do you have an appointment?" Daryl didn't flinch. "Nope," he said. "Didn't know I needed one to look—" She hesitated. "Well, it helps," she replied, tone frosting over. "This isn't a standard lot." And there it was, the gate locking behind him before he even stepped through. Daryl smiled faintly, the kind you wear when someone tells you you're not welcome in your own living room. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. Then he asked, still relaxed, "Any reason you think I'm not a serious buyer?" The question landed like a dropped wrench. She blinked once, forced a laugh, and deflected. "Of course not. I'm just trying to save you time." The irony wasn't lost on him. She was rushing him out the same way people rush strangers from the better side of town. "You have a trade-in?" she asked suddenly, tone clipped. "We offer good rates for reliable pre-owned models." Daryl glanced at the cars, the ones lit up like diamonds in a velvet box, and back at her. "Something tells me you're not going to offer me one of those," he said quietly. Susan's lips twitched, not into a smile, but into something closer to disdain. "We have a few models I think you'll find more practical," she said, pivoting toward a side hallway where lower-paced cars were listed like clearance items. "Let me grab you a sheet." She walked away briskly, her heels echoing across the showroom, but not before tossing a final comment over her shoulder. "It helps to be realistic." Daryl didn't move. He stood there, hands in his pockets, heart slow. He watched the silver coupe again, its curves catching light like it knew it wasn't meant for people in hoodies. And then, just behind him, he heard a chuckle. Not cruel, amused. One of the younger employees leaned against a desk, grinning faintly as if the whole exchange had been a comedy skit. Daryl turned slowly, met his eyes, and said nothing. The employee's smile vanished. And somewhere deep inside Daryl's silence, the story had already begun to shift. Because what Susan and the others didn't know was that the man they were dismissing wasn't there to buy a car. He was there to buy back their attention and turn it into a lesson they'd never forget. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Susan returned with the confidence of someone convinced they were right, the clipboard tucked under her arm like it held sacred truths. She handed Daryl a single printed page, crisp, folded with care, and insulting in the most professional way possible. "These are a few options that might be more suitable for your situation," she said, offering the phrase like a coupon he didn't ask for. Daryl took the page without flinching, unfolding it slowly, scanning each line like he was reading an obituary for dignity. A used sedan, an outdated SUV, a compact hybrid that looked like it came with a free apology. The prices were modest, the descriptions highlighted terms like economical and practical, as if those were synonyms for barely tolerated, and in the silence between them she added, "They're very popular with folks just starting out." That phrase hit harder than she realized. Folks. Starting out. As if he were some intern who'd wandered into a CEO's meeting by accident. He nodded once, folded the list again, and slipped it into his pocket without a word. She didn't hand me a list, he thought. She handed me her assumptions, printed in 12-point font. He smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but out of precision. That's the smile you wear when you realize someone's already decided your worth before you even speak. Susan stood firm, arms crossed, her nails clicking against the clipboard like a metronome counting down his patience. Her words weren't loud, but they echoed. She started explaining depreciation curves like she was talking to someone who'd just learned how credit scores work. Daryl let her talk. He didn't interrupt, didn't challenge, didn't raise his voice. That, he knew, would be read as aggressive. And in places like this, aggression was always punished faster than assumption. He simply let the temperature drop around her words, watched her confidence inflate in the vacuum of his silence. What she didn't realize was that her performance wasn't just condescending. It was being graded in real time, and she was failing with flair. Inside, Daryl wrestled with a familiar ache, not of anger, but exhaustion. The kind of fatigue that settles in your bones after years of having to prove you're harmless before you're even seen as human. He didn't come here to blow up or make a scene, but scenes, unfortunately, had a way of making themselves, and he could feel it now, how the eyes of the room shifted, how the staff leaned just slightly to hear more, how even the air felt like it was pressing against him. He looked at the car again, the one that caught his eye earlier, the silver coupe gleaming like it knew how rare it was, a symbol of precision, elegance, value. A car like that isn't just driven, it's declared. And yet here he stood, deemed unworthy of even touching the handle. Susan must have noticed his eyes wandering, because she stepped forward suddenly, not with concern, but with control. "Let's not touch the vehicles unless we're ready to move forward, okay?" Her tone was tight, teacher to student, not advisor to helter. It was the kind of voice that didn't say, "I want to help," but, "I've already decided you don't belong here." Daryl turned to her slowly, his voice smooth but layered with something sharper beneath. "You said this dealership isn't for everyone. What does that mean?" Susan blinked. For a fraction of a second, the script she'd rehearsed her whole career slipped. I just mean, these vehicles require a different level of, well, we try to make sure people aren't wasting their time. The words dropped heavy, veiled just enough to hide behind if challenged, but clear enough to wound. Darryl gave a single nod, emotion so small it could be missed, but behind it his entire mood shifted. So, I'm wasting your time? She stammered. No, of course not. Look, I'm being upfront. This isn't a walk-and-browse kind of place. Darryl let the silence breathe between them, then finally said, All right, then let me speak to the owner. He said it with calm confidence, as if he were asking to see a menu, not flipping the table. Susan froze, not dramatically, but in that subtle way people do when the power they thought they had starts leaking through the seams. The owner, she asked, almost laughing. Sir, the owner doesn't show up unannounced. They don't really do Hoodie hour. Her words were quick, like a reflex, but the damage had already landed. The term Hoodie hour cut through the air like a slap you can't prove. Darryl didn't react, not externally. He just let it hang there, made sure everyone who overheard it could sit with it too. No problem, he said, but I'd still like to speak with them. Susan shook her head, that rehearsed smile now worn thin. That's not how things work here, she said, her voice stiff. If you're serious about making a purchase, I can schedule you with a sales lead. Darryl didn't argue. He nodded, stepped back, hands still in his pockets. Then I'll make the call myself, he said quietly, and with that he pulled out his phone. And for the first time since he walked in, Susan looked concerned. Not because he was a threat, but because suddenly she wasn't sure who she was talking to anymore. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Darryl held the phone like it was just another extension of his calm, scrolling through his contacts with the ease of a man who'd done this before. No theatrics, no threats, just the subtle kind of confidence that made silence feel like a countdown. He found the name, tapped, and raised the phone to his ear. Yeah, it's me, he said, voice low but unmistakably firm. I'm at the dealership, everything's fine, just a little misunderstanding. Let them know I'm here. He didn't pace. He didn't look around for approval. He simply ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket like he was putting a checkmate back in the box. A few feet away, Susan's mouth parted slightly, as if she wanted to interrupt but couldn't find her footing. Her clipboard, once her shield, now hung at her side like a forgotten prop. It was no longer the weapon. The tone had shifted, and everyone could feel it, but no one yet knew how far it would tip. Susan cleared her throat, the sound brittle, like glass under a boot. Is everything all right? She asked, trying to retake the lead in a game she no longer understood. Darryl didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the silver coupe again, studying it not with longing but with purpose. It will be, he replied after a beat, his voice smooth but unshakable. Just waiting on someone who actually works for me. The sentence wasn't loud, but it detonated in the space between them like a silent alarm only the guilty could hear. Her composure frayed at the edges, though she tried to hide it with a chuckle that didn't quite land. Must be nice to have connections, she said, but even she knew her words were empty. For the first time, her certainty faltered, not because of what he wore, but because of what he hadn't said. Across the showroom, the hum of conversation dipped like a vinyl record slowing to a crawl. One of the younger employees near the reception desk leaned in toward a colleague and whispered just loud enough to carry, "Who is he?" The question didn't come with an answer, only widened eyes and a shared look that meant we might have messed up. Susan caught it too, her jaw tightening as if she could snap the tension in half with her teeth. But she didn't say a word. She just hovered nearby, adjusting the clipboard she no longer referred to, pretending to scan notes that didn't matter anymore. The others, those who had laughed when Darryl walked in, those who had looked right through him like tinted glass, were now starting to shift. Postures straightened, brows furrowed, phones were silenced. It was like the entire room had started holding its breath at the same time. They didn't know the plot had twisted, but they could feel it, and that made it worse. The loudest person in the room isn't always the one holding power. Sometimes it's the one who knows they don't need to raise their voice. Darryl hadn't made a scene. He hadn't thrown words or weight. He hadn't marched in with declarations or demanded attention. He had let the silence speak. And in that silence, something had broken. Perception. Respect doesn't come from volume. It comes from presence. And Darryl's presence now filled the room with a gravity that pulled truth to the surface. Susan fidgeted, her fingers tapping the side of her thigh now, not the clipboard. And when Darryl glanced in her direction again, it wasn't to intimidate. It was to observe. Because the truth didn't need an announcement, it just needed to arrive. The glass doors parted with a hiss, and the quiet snapped like a rubber band. A man stepped through, dressed in a sharp navy suit that fit like it had been tailored by someone who understood precision. His gait was confident, controlled, but warm, and the moment his eyes landed on Darryl, he smiled. Not the smile of a stranger, but the recognition of hierarchy. "Mr. Carter," he called out, his voice easy and full of welcome. "You're so good to see you." The room didn't move. Susan's eyes widened, her clipboard tilted, nearly falling from her grasp. And suddenly, no one in the showroom was looking at the cars. They were all looking at the man they had nearly pushed out the door, and wondering, quietly and urgently, "What have we done?" The moment Alex addressed him as Mr. Carter, the entire energy of the showroom imploded into silence. The tone wasn't formal just for the sake of courtesy. It was reverent, familiar, and layered with a professionalism that signaled who held the real keys to the kingdom. Susan froze mid-breath. Her clipboard, once held like a sword, slipped slightly in her grip. Her eyes darted from Darryl to Alex and back again, her brain scrambling for a script that no longer applied. Around them, staff stood like mannequins mid-shift, trying to piece together a hierarchy they hadn't seen coming. Darrow stepped forward to meet Alex's handshake, calm as ever, and returned it with a nod. The simplicity of the gesture was almost cruel in its elegance. It said everything without saying anything, and in that heartbeat of recognition, Susan's posture collapsed just a little, not enough to fall, but enough to show the weight of realization crushing her spine. Susan took a step forward, mouth already open. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize—" Darryl turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable, his voice softer than it had been all day. "Didn't realize what?" he asked. "That someone like me could own a place like this?" His tone wasn't bitter. It was precise, like a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. She opened her mouth again, but this time nothing came out. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The walls of pretense were coming down around her, one word at a time. "I thought," she began, but he stopped her with a tilt of the head. "You assumed." Her silence agreed, a silence more honest than anything she'd said so far. The room didn't breathe. Even the AC sounded like it had paused to listen. She wasn't selling cars. She was selling permission to belong. And Darryl had walked in wearing a hoodie, so she tried to revoke his access card before he could speak. She thought her polished shoes and laminated lists gave her that right, but now, as the truth settled in like dust over a forgotten display model, it became clear what she really sold was separation, a hierarchy. One where trust was given to those who looked the part and suspicion handed to those who didn't. And now in front of her stood the man who not only had the means, but the title, the deed, and the power to change the story. The man she'd tried to walk past had already bought the building, and she hadn't seen him not because he was invisible, but because she wasn't really looking. Around them, employees shifted, their earlier smugness replaced with quiet fear, like children caught eavesdropping on grown-up consequences. Alex turned to the rest of the room, clearing his throat. "Just to be clear," he said, with a glance toward the cluster of now silent staff, "Mr. Carter isn't just a customer, he's the new owner of Prestige Motors." The sentence landed like a dropped hammer. No drama, no thunder, just the quiet crack of reality rearranging itself. Susan's mouth opened again, then closed. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. She just stood there, her clipboard now a useless artifact from a world that no longer existed. And in that stillness, her silence finally said what her words never could. She'd judged the man who signs her paycheck, and she'd done it with confidence. The weight of that truth pressed on every soul in the room. A few salespeople looked down at their shoes. One young assistant, who had earlier chuckled under his breath when Darryl walked in, now seemed to be holding it instead. Darryl let the quiet stretch, just long enough for the discomfort to start teaching. Then he turned back to Susan, not with anger but with something heavier, truth wrapped in restraint. "If I hadn't been the owner," he asked, his voice a low current of clarity, "would you have treated me any differently?" Susan blinked rapidly, her eyes already glossed with the beginnings of shame. She didn't answer. She couldn't. And that silence? That silence was the moment everything became real, because she knew the answer, and so did everyone else. Darrow looked at her for another second, then turned back toward the center of the showroom, where the silver coupe still waited under perfect lights, untouched, unblemished, and now, suddenly, a symbol of a lesson well earned. The reckoning hadn't roared, it had whispered. And yet, it had been deafening. Darryl stood near the head of the long glass conference table, arms loosely folded, his posture calm but firm. The room was a modern marvel, glass walls on three sides, minimalist design, recessed lighting, and framed photos of luxury vehicles gracing the walls like awards in a silent competition. But today, none of that beauty mattered. The mood was cold, still, and so heavy it could be felt in the lungs. One by one, the employees filed in, exchanging cautious glances, some trying not to meet his eyes at all. Susan entered last, her shoulders slightly hunched, and took a seat at the far end of the table, her clipboard nowhere in sight. Alex stood silently near the door, his expression unreadable but clearly watchful. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like the sealing of a verdict. Darryl waited until every seat was filled before speaking, letting the silence do its job, before his voice took over. And when he began, he didn't start with anger, he started with clarity. "I came here today in a hoodie and sneakers for one reason," he said, his voice measured and steady. "To see how this place treats people when you don't know who you're talking to." A few employees shifted in their seats, eyes darting to the floor. Darryl didn't name names. He didn't need to. "I didn't come to test you," he continued. "I came to see you." His words hung in the air, and then he delivered the unexpected truth. And what I saw was a culture too comfortable with assumption, and too quick to decide someone's worth based on their clothes, not their character. Across the table, a receptionist's jaw tensed. Another manager cleared his throat and glanced toward the window. But no one interrupted. Today wasn't just about me. I didn't walk through those doors to create drama. I walked in like any other customer might. And the way I was handled, it wasn't just one bad moment. It was a mirror, and that reflection wasn't good. He paused, then continued, this time his voice threaded with the kind of disappointment that cuts deeper than anger. "Respect shouldn't be earned by the car you drive, but by the way you walk through a door." His eyes moved across the room, landing momentarily on Susan, who lowered her gaze. "You don't sell cars. You sell experiences. People don't just come here for a machine. They come here to be seen, to be taken seriously. When someone is dismissed before they speak, when they're assumed unqualified without a question asked, that's not customer service. That's customer selection. And when it's wrapped in politeness, it's even more dangerous, because it sounds nice while doing harm." He stepped forward slightly, resting his hands on the edge of the table. "If your warmth only extends to wallets that match your assumptions, then what we've built here is a showroom of discrimination with a marble floor." The silence thickened, but no one dared move. The room was no longer about cars. It was about who got to be valued and who didn't. For a moment, the silence stretched like a taut wire. Then a voice broke through, softer than the tension but clearer than the guilt. "Sometimes," a younger staffer said, voice hesitant, We don't even realize the bias. It's just how things have been done. All eyes turned toward him. He looked nervous, but sincere. We're trained to read the room, and sometimes reading the room means making assumptions before asking questions. It's not right, but it's there. And maybe we don't talk about it because we don't even notice it anymore. He glanced at Daryl, then around the room as if searching for backup that wouldn't come. But you're right. It shouldn't take a surprise reveal for us to treat someone with decency. His words landed somewhere between confession and apology. The room didn't exhale. It braced. Daryl nodded, his expression calm but heavy. That's the danger, he said quietly, because unseen bias leads to visible damage. He let that sentence echo, undisturbed. Not every harm needs to come with shouting. Some of the most painful wounds wear suits and smile while they cut. The room fell back into silence, but this time it wasn't avoidance. It was reflection. He had turned the mirror on the institution, and now everyone was seeing their own reflection in it, and none of them liked what they saw. Daryl turned to the far end of the table, his eyes landing gently but directly on Susan. The room instinctively shifted their focus with him. For a moment, Susan didn't look up. Her hands, usually so firm on a clipboard or resting on her hips in authority, were now clasped in her lap, fingers knotted. Daryl didn't raise his voice or call her out. Instead, he extended a quiet opening. "Susan, if there's something you'd like to say, I think this is the right time." The room didn't move. Susan's voice, when it finally came, cracked under its own weight. I misjudged you," she began, barely above a whisper. "And I misjudged the moment. I let my assumptions take the lead instead of my professionalism." She paused, eyes welling. "What I did was wrong, and I'm ashamed of how I handled it. I didn't mean to disrespect you, but I know I did. And I'm sorry." Her voice shook near the end, and that tremble was real, not rehearsed, not for show, but Daryl, while listening, didn't rush to ease her guilt. He let it sit there. Because growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from collision. He nodded once, slowly, not with dismissal but with gravity. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "I believe in second chances, but accountability comes first." The words weren't meant to shame, they were meant to anchor. An apology means very little if nothing changes afterward. Words are wind. Culture is concrete. The air shifted again. Not colder, but clearer. He continued, still composed, still quiet. Today wasn't just about bias, it was about how easy it is to let disrespect become routine when no one checks it. "I don't want you, or anyone here, to beat themselves up, but I do expect you to stand up. Next time a customer walks through those doors, they shouldn't have to look the part to be treated like a person, and they shouldn't have to own the building to earn basic respect." He straightened a bit, eyes scanning the room. "Growth starts where ego ends. This isn't about dragging anyone through the mud. It's about making sure we're not building castles on sand. If you think someone doesn't belong based on a hoodie, a name, or the car they drive, that's your cue to check yourself, not your customer. Because here's the truth, respect shouldn't be performance-based. It should be policy." A few heads nodded slowly. Susan blinked hard and looked down again, lips pressed together like she was holding back more than tears. She was holding back everything she once thought she knew. "The goal here isn't to be perfect," Daryl added, "but to stop hiding behind polite prejudice and start leading with uncomfortable honesty." After the meeting, as staff filtered out, Susan lingered by the door, hesitant, then stepped forward to catch Daryl as he gathered his notes. Her voice was lower now, not out of fear, but humility. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I just wanted to say again, I know I messed up, but I really do want to learn from this. I don't want this moment to define me. I want how I respond next to be the difference." Daryl paused, then met her eyes fully. "Actions talk louder than any memo," he said. "If you mean that, then show it. Not for me, but for the next person who walks in here with nothing but a quiet presence and 1,000 reasons to be judged." She nodded, the kind of nod that didn't just say, "I understand," but "I will do something with this understanding." When the last employee left the room, Daryl returned to the table and addressed Alex, who was already taking notes. "We're going to implement bias and inclusion training immediately. Not just the once-a-year stuff people sleep through. Real sessions, scenarios, role reversals, customer simulations. We'll rotate team leads to observe, not grade, but guide. Every employee will be evaluated on customer respect just as much as sales numbers." He paused, then added, "From now on, respect isn't a soft skill. It's a hard requirement." Alex nodded, writing fast, the gravity of Daryl's tone clear. "And every complaint," Daryl continued, "won't be handled behind closed doors. We'll track patterns. If someone can't adjust, they won't stay. Because misjudging people isn't just wrong, it's expensive. It costs trust, it costs loyalty. And I'm not in the business of bleeding value just to protect someone's comfort." The lesson was clear: forgiveness may open the door, but accountability decides who gets to stay inside. The conference room emptied slowly, as if everyone instinctively knew that walking out wasn't just the end of a meeting, it was the start of something different. The air had shifted, not lighter, not yet, but honest. Daryl remained behind, stepping quietly back into the gleaming showroom that earlier had swallowed him whole. The same silver coupe sat in its halo of spotlights, untouched since his arrival, but now it looked less like a prize and more like a mirror. He didn't see a car anymore. He saw posture, glances, tone. He saw every customer who had ever been measured by how they dressed instead of how they spoke. And then he saw every employee who'd never questioned the scale they used. Around him, staff returned to work. But their eyes were different now. Even the silence between conversations held a trace of reflection. The showroom was polished, yes, but something more important had been surfaced today. From the corner of his eye, he saw Susan approach again, her steps hesitant but grounded in something real this time. She stopped a few feet away, hands unclenched, voice quieter than before. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you for giving me space to realize how wrong I was and for not using your power to humiliate me." Dullero looked at her and saw not guilt but growth, fighting for ground. "I won't let you down," she added. Her voice didn't tremble this time. It steadied itself, stood on its own. There was no clipboard between them now, no title to lean on. Just two people standing in the middle of a place built to shine, but now, maybe, built to see. Daryl gave her a single nod, quiet but weighty. Not forgiveness, not approval, just a signal that the door she was afraid of had stayed open, and what she did next was up to her. You can change steel, you just have to heat it long enough. That's what he thought as he turned back toward the row of cars. Culture, like steel, doesn't bend because you ask it to. It bends when enough pressure, enough time, and enough courage are applied. The same way a high-performance engine doesn't run without precision, a team doesn't grow without discomfort. Daryl had no intention of being the kind of leader who ruled from a boardroom and let silence be his shield. No, he'd lead like a mirror, showing people what they didn't always want to see and staying there until they chose to face it. A few employees glanced at him as they walked past, offering nods that held something more than politeness now. There was a new energy taking root, not revolution, but redefinition. And maybe that was the first gear of change. Alex stepped out from the hallway, arms folded, watching the floor for a second before walking over. His voice was lower, more deliberate than usual. "You know," he said, "you're not just running a dealership here. You're setting a standard. Most owners would have just written up a policy and moved on. You walked through fire and made them feel the heat." Daryl half smiled. "Policies don't change hearts. Moments do." Alex chuckled lightly but didn't argue. "Well, this place is going to run differently now, that's clear. You'll lose some folks who can't shift gears, but the ones who stay, those are the ones worth building with." He paused, then added, "I've worked with a lot of leaders, Daryl. Not many choose the hard road on purpose." Daryl didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out across the lot, his reflection bouncing off the polished hood of the nearest car. Sometimes the hard road's the only one that gets you anywhere worth going. He stepped outside without a word, the glass doors sliding open like they knew who he was now. The desert sun greeted him, warm and unapologetic. He paused for a second, letting the heat settle into his shoulders. It felt different now. Less like a weight, more like fuel. Behind him, the showroom doors eased closed, but what had happened inside would linger long after. Darryl took a deep breath, looking out across the lot, not at the cars, but at the possibility. I didn't come here to buy a car, he thought. I came to test a system, and now I get to drive the change. He smiled faintly, not the smile of someone who had won, but of someone who knew where the road started next. In a world where appearances too often write the story, he had rewritten one, and the engine of something better had just turned over. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.